Hello, everyone. Today I'll be presenting the works of Luis Ramiro Barragan Morfin, who's an architect from Mexico, and we'll see how his work influenced the modernist movement in Mexico and in other parts of the world. So Barragan was born in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico in 1902, and he graduated from the Escuela Libre de Ingenieros, which is actually a school for engineers, for civil engineering. So he received his degree in civil engineering, but was a self-taught artist and architect who was influenced by many people, and that is how many of his forms and work came to be. So after graduating college, he was awarded a trip to Europe where he gained most of his architectural influence from Le Corbusier and Ferdinand Bach. Both of these architects influenced very different aspects of his architecture. So Bach was a French cartoonist, artist, and writer who promoted the idea of the garden. In his trip, Barragan also became interested in Islamic architecture, architectural elements, and North African culture. And this can be seen in some of Bach's work. It has a lot to do with the garden, which we will see is a common theme amongst Barragan's work and how he transforms the idea of a garden from this very heavily vegetated area to something a little bit more orthogonal and less ornate. So when he returned to Mexico, he worked on a set of gardens and buildings in El Pedregal, Mexico, in Mexico City. And this area was particularly interesting because it sits on the remains of the erupted volcano of Sitle in the 11th century. And he wanted to completely transform this space from a desertous place where there was not a single house to a place filled with gardens and homes to satisfy the spirit. Here's where he really began to center all his work around evoking emotion and spiritual experiences rather than having simply form and function. So here are some of his works in the garden in El Pedregal. And you can see how it starts off very heavily vegetated, as I previously said, and a lot more looking like a typical garden. So a quote from him is, "I believe that architects should design gardens to be used as much as the house they build to develop a sense of beauty and the taste and inclination towards the fine arts and other spiritual values. And further, any work of architecture which does not express serenity is a mistake." So the modernist influence from Le Corbusier was the one of purism, which Barragan adopted well. And that can be seen in his Casa Estudio Barragan, which is the home where he lived in and explored most of his architectural aspects. This is basically the place that he scrapped everything, thought of all his ideas. It was his brainstorming space, and he was really able to bring about many of his ideas within the home itself. So he said, "It seems important to me that space is not aggressive. I always use low forms and permanently worked with right angles. At all times in my work, I had in mind the horizontal and vertical planes and angles of intersection. This explains the frequence of the cube in my architecture." Here's some of the interiors of the space. So Fuente de los Amantes is really pieces together a lot of these forms that he has been working with, in the sense that this garden is less a typical garden with heavy vegetation, but rather a simple and orthogonal space which still aims to evoke the spiritual. So he also really enjoyed horseback riding, and many of his works include water that would essentially be for the horses. And this is a theme that we'll see later revisited. So to continue to evoke the spiritual, Barragan experimented with the effects of light and color. So Capilla de las Capuchinas in Mexico City is a religious architectural work of the 20th century. So Barragan knew that the chapel was a place where you dropped to your knees before the divine. So he aimed to create this mystic space as spiritual as possible. He said that yellow was the color of spirituality, which is used and brought about throughout the whole project. As you can see, the cross here actually has light shining through it from behind, so that the main focus isn't on the cross, which is sort of hidden on the side of where the prayer would actually take place. Instead, it is actually the shadow reflected on the wall that creates the experience of having something divine there with you as you are praying. So you're not looking directly at the cross when you pray, you're actually looking at the shadow. And here there's just a lot of use of these um, stained glass, all in yellow, because that was his preferred color for spirituality. Um, and many narrow spaces just reflecting lots of light. So many of the elements that Barragan had been using came together in Casa Gilardi. So the swimming pool is a central place in this home, and this was the first human usable body of water that he had used. And this swimming pool is particularly interesting because it also brings together many of those architectural forms of the water and light. So there's the strip of white light shining down from the skylight that creates a very emotional experience. And the colors in this home were influenced by an artist called Chucho Reyes Ferreira. And he said that, so after consulting with him, Barragan had decided that he doesn't paint anything green. He lets the green be painted by nature, and therefore he likes to use very bright colors that kind of oppose what nature already has. And again, the light can be seen throughout the whole project and these very bright colors. So he won the Pritzker Prize in 1980, and he was also featured in the UNESCO. He was featured in UNESCO. And so his work is very important because this prize is only awarded to one architect once a year. And he did an amazing job at removing architecture from the typical view arts that many countries had adopted from Europe, and brought his own sort of um, critique and forms to Mexico, also sort of borrowed from North America. And that is a really big step forward for the modernist movement. Thank you.